Hello, everyone. This is horror author James Hershey Jr. from the Staring into the Abyss radio show. And recently I did a video on this channel that had an article in it about a young boy who had died multiple times. And he saw Jesus and he held his hand. And in that video, I said that I had had my own death experience that I talked about on the radio show. And that I would be putting a video up on the channel that had just that story in it so that you could find it easier. So that's what this video is going to be. So what you're getting ready to listen to is that part of the radio show where I am telling about my experience where I died and came back. So without further ado, I hope that you enjoy it. It happened when I was young. I was in high school at the time. And down here by where I live, there's a place called Gypsy Falls. Now, what Gypsy Falls is a cliff that has a waterfall beside it. It's a small waterfall, but it's a waterfall. And underneath of the cliff, there are several different rocks and a bunch of water. So we used to go down there a lot to go swimming because the water was ice cold all the time. So even on the hottest of days, you could go down there and jump in that water and it would be ice cold and it would just be refreshing. So one night, me and a good friend of mine, we picked up a couple of girls and we decided that we wanted to go skinny dipping with these females. Now, we had been drinking a little bit, but we drank all the time, so we weren't as drunk as we normally were. But we had had a few beers. So we decided that we're going to go down to Gypsy Falls and go skinny dipping at night. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning, in between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning when we got down to Gypsy Falls, somewhere in that range. We pulled up. To get to Gypsy Falls, you pull off of the main road onto a dirt driveway thing. And then it's a short walk through the woods to get to Gypsy Falls. And once you get there, there's a path that leads down around away from the waterfall. Because the path heads towards the waterfall and then turns at the waterfall and kind of circles down and around to get down to the water where you can actually get in and go swimming. This was a time before there were cell phones. Cell phones did not exist then. They had some of the mobile phones and the car phones, but they were the ones that were the gigantic bag. It looked like a tote bag that you carried the phone in. And mobile phones looked like some kind of military walkie-talkie at the time, and they were insanely expensive. They were multiple thousands of dollars. And I did not have a lot of money back then. So none of us had phones at all. We also did not have a flashlight with us because we were teenagers and we hadn't planned on, running around in the woods in the dark. It was one of those things where we met up with some girls and we decided on the fly that, hey, we're going to go down to Gypsy Falls to go skinny dipping because we want to get these women naked. That was the plan. So we pull off the main road into the dirt driveway and we get out of the car, and I very confidently looked at all three of them and I said, "Follow me. I know exactly where I'm going. I've been down here a lot of different times." So we start walking through the woods and they're following behind me. And I realize as I'm walking through the woods that I can't see where the hell I'm going. Now, I was a smoker at the time, so I did have a lighter. But I did not pull my lighter out to try to light my way. I don't know why I didn't. It would have made perfect sense, but for whatever reason, I just did not think of it at the time. So we're walking through the woods there, the dark woods, and I can barely see anything. I mean, I can see a little bit, enough not to run into a tree, but literally it's maybe a foot in front of my face is all I can see, and I can't make that out very well either. So we're walking, and I remember thinking that I needed to start paying close attention because enough time had passed that we should be getting near the turn where I need to turn to go down, to walk down around so I could get to the water. I remember thinking that the cliff would be coming up soon, so I needed to start paying attention to where I was walking because very soon I would end up around where the cliff was and I didn't want to miss that turn. Right as I was thinking of that, I felt that there was not ground underneath my feet anymore. I had taken a step and there was no ground to put my foot on. I lost my balance and I went forwards, and I felt myself falling through the air. I realized as I was falling that I had indeed come to the cliff and I had walked right off the cliff. I remember falling, and I remember it wasn't really pain, but it was just a hot burning kind of sensation as my head hit a rock. And then I remember the ice cold water. I remember slamming into that water and sinking down. Now, one thing that you need to know about Gypsy Falls before I go any further in this story is that there have been many people over the years that have died here at Gypsy Falls. Because for whatever reason, there's a weird like suction underneath there. Because you have the falls and you have your swimming hole there. But if you swim down in the swimming hole and over to the side a little bit, there's like a little cave area there. And for whatever reason, maybe the churning of the water when it hits coming off the falls, but for some reason there's some kind of undertow there. There's a suction that will suck people up underneath the falls into that cave. And it's very hard to get back out of there once you get sucked in, and a lot of people drown. So there's been multiple people over the years that have gotten sucked under and died there at Gypsy Falls. So it's not a place that they really like you to go. But I was young, I was rebellious, I didn't care what anybody else wanted me to do or what they thought. And I had two hot chicks with me, and we were hoping to see them naked. That's why we were skinny dipping. So I could really care less about how dangerous Gypsy Falls was at the time. Now, once I hit the water, it was very, very cold. And I was still wearing everything I had on. I had my leather jacket on, I had my t-shirt on, my pants, my boots, everything. Because I was not expecting to be in the water yet. I was expecting to walk down the path and then get undressed and go into the water. But I walked right off the cliff, so I fell. Now I remember being under the water, and I remember that's when the pain started in my head. What was at first a burning sensation had turned into a throbbing pain. It sucked. That's the only way I can describe it. It absolutely sucked. It hurt like hell. I remember that I was kind of confused, and I couldn't tell which way was up and which way was down. Now, they teach you to look for the bubbles. Whenever you take like a swimming class or a scuba class or anything like that, they teach you, if you ever become disorientated underneath the water, to just watch your bubbles. When you exhale, watch the bubbles, and they always go up. So all you have to do is follow the bubbles. I wish I would have remembered that at the time, but I didn't. I was having trouble concentrating. I was having trouble thinking straight. I remember my chest started burning, and I felt like my lungs were about to explode if I didn't breathe. So I had the pain in my head, I had the pain in my lungs, and it was very, very cold. Even colder than normal at Gypsy Falls. Because Gypsy Falls, the water, like I said, is always cold. But for whatever reason, it felt way colder than usual. I remember all those uncomfortable things, all that pain, and then all of a sudden, all the pain was gone. It was all gone. I didn't hurt anymore. It was no longer dark. Everything was lit up around me. Very bright. I no longer felt like I was in water. I wasn't cold anymore. I was comfortable. And I felt like I was floating, but not in water, in air. I was just floating there in air. And I also remember that my lungs didn't hurt anymore. They didn't feel like they were about to explode because I was now breathing normally. I was breathing in and out, not water, but air. And I was in no discomfort at all. I was completely fine, calm, happy. Everything was wonderful. No pain. And I remember thinking for a second, what the hell is going on? I just fell off the cliff and hit my head. I know I hit my head because I felt it. And I was in the water. What the hell's going on? It was nighttime. And now it's bright. I mean, just super bright. It didn't make any sense to me. And the fact that I could breathe when I know damn well I was underwater. The fact that I could breathe again was strange. And I began to panic a little bit. I began to kind of freak out. Because I didn't know what was going on. It didn't make any sense. I'm a guy that puts a lot of stock in logic, fact, things I can reach out and grab a hold of. This made absolutely no sense to me. I could not understand what had happened and why I could breathe again, why I didn't hurt anymore, why it was completely bright instead of pitch black. It made no sense. This only went on for a couple seconds. And I remember before I could really figure out what was going on, I felt a presence behind me. I wanted to turn and look at whatever it was that was behind me, whatever I felt, that presence. I wanted to turn and look at it. I wanted to see what was coming up behind me. Because my whole life I've been a fighter. I've been a guy that when someone sneaks up behind me, I automatically think the worst. I automatically think that I'm getting ready to be attacked. So I have to spin around. I have to face my attacker. I have to fight that threat and destroy it. That's how I've always been. But even though I wanted to turn around, and even though I needed to turn around to see what was behind me, I couldn't move. I was frozen in place. The presence got closer to me, and I felt a pair of arms wrap around me from behind and hold me. They embraced me. They hugged me close. No words were spoken. It just held me. And I remember at that moment, all the panic that was inside of me just washed away. It was like I was completely full, and somebody just pulled the plug and it all just drained out. In place of that panic and that fear that I was beginning to feel was an unbelievable sense of calm and joy and love. I have never in my life felt love like that. I have never in my life felt that kind of joy and that kind of acceptance. And that's the other part of it, was the acceptance. I mean, I felt like no matter what I've done in my life, no matter how bad I was, no matter how big of a piece of garbage that I had been in my life, and at that time I was not the guy that I am now. I was not a good guy. You know, I was a guy that would beat you into hamburger on the street if you looked at me wrong. I was not nice. And no matter how much of a prick I was, and no matter what kind of bad things I had done in my life, I felt like it really didn't matter anymore. I felt completely accepted and loved unconditionally for what I am. And I had never in my life experienced that before. Not that level of love. Now, I came from a great family. My mother and my father and my brother, they loved me what I thought was unconditionally. They would die for me in a heartbeat. So I had a wonderful, loving, great family. But even as great as my family was, even as much as my parents had loved me in my life, it didn't even compare to the level of love that I felt from this presence that was behind me. Now, as I stood there and I was being held, I got the feeling that it was a male presence that was holding me. I can't tell you exactly why I felt that way, because I was looking straight ahead. I couldn't even look down at the arms that were holding me to see what they looked like. I tried, but I wasn't able to move. So I can't tell you that I knew that it was a male presence because of the arms, or because of any other reasons. I just felt like it was. It just felt to me like it was a male presence behind me. And I remember I never wanted to leave. I wanted to stay right there, exactly the way it was, forever. I had never been so happy. I had never felt so loved and accepted and just good. I never felt so good in my entire life. The presence behind me spoke to me at that point. But spoke to me isn't really the right words. Because even though I clearly heard what the person said, they never actually spoke any words. It was as if that person that was behind me, holding me, it was as if they could speak directly into my mind without my ears having to pick it up. So the words were never actually spoken. They weren't audible outside, but I could hear them inside of my own head. Almost like when you have a thought, when you talk to yourself in your mind, but it wasn't me that was saying the words. It was coming from somebody else. The words that were spoken to me were, you have to go back. Now, I had never in my life received such terrible news. I was not at all happy about the idea of going back. I did not want to leave this place. I did not want to leave those arms. Inside of my mind, I begged. I pleaded. I yelled. I screamed. I cried. I did anything I thought I could to convince this person to let me stay. I didn't want to go. The presence behind me listened to all of my pleas, listened to me rant and rave and threaten and scream and beg silently. And then when I was finished, it simply repeated, "You have to go back." As soon as the presence repeated that for the second time, I felt cold again. And a split second later, I burst up from the water as if I was swimming desperately towards the surface. My head came up out of the water and I gasped a breath of air. Now, when I took that deep breath of air, I got a little bit of water with it, which caused me to cough and hack and spit water for a little bit. Another thing that I noticed besides the cold was my head hurt again. Somehow I managed to swim my way over to the rocks. Now, swim may not be the right word because it was more like a desperate float doggy paddle thing. I don't know. I'm a unbelievable swimmer. I am a really good swimmer. But I wasn't able to swim properly at that moment. So I did what I could, and I made my way over to the rocks at the base of the path. I pulled myself up, and I sat there for a minute, trying to catch my breath, and trying to figure out what the hell had just happened to me. It was at this moment that I remembered that I had a lighter in my pocket, because I needed to try to find my way back up the path. But I was afraid of falling back down into the water because I didn't feel like I had almost any energy left at all. I felt drained. I dug in my pocket and I pulled this lighter out, and I started trying to light the lighter so that I could see to go up the path. Now, in my mind, for whatever reason, I couldn't put together logically that the lighter was not going to light because I had been under the water, so it was soaking wet. And my cigarettes were soaking wet. Everything was soaking wet. I was wet, wet, wet. So the lighter would not light at all. I couldn't even get really a spark out of it. I remember that I started to yell for my friend and the girls that were up on the top of the path where the cliff was. I began to yell for them. And at first, there was no answer. And then I yelled again. And my friend that was standing up there yelled back down to me. But his voice didn't sound right because he had been crying. He ended up pulling his lighter out and using it to make his way down the path and get me and bring me back up to the path. He helped me back to the car and we sat there for a little while I tried to recover and get my head together enough to drive home. While we were sitting there in the car, he told me that he thought that I was dead. And I remember being confused by this because I said, "What do you mean? I just fell off the cliff. I hit and that was it. And then I came back." I did not tell him about what I had experienced because I didn't know if he would believe me. And I didn't want, at that time when you're a teenager, I mean, you don't want people to make fun of you. You don't want to be the butt of anybody's joke. And a story like this, I thought would definitely make me sound crazy. So I did not share what had happened to him. And I never told anybody about this until many, many years later. And I still haven't told a whole lot of people. It's only a few people that I've actually told this story to. And now I guess everybody listening. So eventually I guess millions of people will probably hear this story, but that's all right. Because I'm okay with telling it because I don't care anymore if people think I'm crazy. Because I know what happened. But I remember being confused because I thought, well, I wonder how long I was gone. You know, because to me, I imagined since I was underwater, it must have all taken place in the span of a second or two. What felt like a long time to me in my mind was probably only a second or two because I could not have survived that long underneath the water. I would have drowned. He told me that I had been under the water for like 10 or 15 minutes. He said it was a long time. It was so long that they had thought that I had died. And the girls got scared and freaked out and they left. They actually made their way out and walked home because they didn't want to be there because they thought I was dead and they didn't want to get in any trouble, so they took off. He had not left me. He had sat there and he had begun to cry because he didn't know what to do. He didn't, I mean, I hadn't come back up and he was afraid that I was dead and he didn't know what to do about it. He didn't know if he should go in the water and try to find my body and bring it out, or if he should try to walk out of there and go find help. I mean, I had the car keys in my pocket because it was my car. So he would have had to walk home. And he didn't know if he should try to find someone to come help. But by the time he could, it would have been too late anyway. And he thought maybe it was already too late. So he was really worried and freaking out and panicking. And he said when I came back up, it had been quite a while because he had argued with the girls to stay and they had left anyway. And he had tried to convince them to bring back help. And they told them no, that they were going to pretend were never here because they didn't want to get in trouble and all this stuff. So it had been a little bit of time that had passed and I hadn't come up. So to me, this was very strange because I wondered why I didn't drown. And then I began to think maybe I did. Maybe when I came up, when I thought that I had sucked in some water, when I tried to take a breath and it made me cough water out and hack and spit to get it all up and be able to breathe normally again, maybe I hadn't taken in water when I was coming up. Maybe I had taken in water while I was down there and I had actually died. And when I came up, I was spitting it back out. I was coughing up the water. Now that doesn't entirely sound possible to me. That sounds like it's something that could never happen. But then again, this whole story sounds to me like something that could never happen, and yet I know it did. So I can't really explain why I drowned and then was still able to swim up. Maybe I didn't fully die. Maybe it was some weird thing. I don't know. But I know that what happened to me was 100% real. So that was the story of my death and when I came back to life, essentially. It really changed my life. It brought me back to God. It completely changed who I was. So I hope that you enjoyed that story. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of it. And thank you once again for all the support and the love that you give me. Until I speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. God loves you, and so do I. Bye-bye.